Welcome to another deep dive. This time, you asked us to take a closer look at the Tulsa Race Massacre.
Yeah.
And we're going deep into a recent Department of Justice report about it.
It's a really fascinating report, actually.
Yeah.
Not only does it, acknowledge the horrible things that happen,
Right.
but it also explains why, even with our laws today, getting justice is it's impossible.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
That's what really got me, too. It's like, even with all our modern laws, it suggests it wouldn't be enough
Right.
to really wrap our heads around this. We need to go back to Greenwood before the massacre happened.
Yeah.
The report calls it Black Wall Street.
Uh-huh.
I want to understand what that really meant for the people who live there.
Yeah. So imagine a community just teeming with life. A cultural hub. Greenwood was home to professionals, entrepreneurs, you name it. There were over 30 restaurants, luxury hotels, even a library and a school system.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
A whole self-sufficient ecosystem.
Exactly.
But then knowing what was to come, it's just jarring.
It's essential to remember that Tulsa had a history of racial tension even before the massacre.
Yeah.
The report even mentions a white lynching the year before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That really makes you think.
Right.
Was there more simmering beneath the surface than we even realize?
Yeah, for sure. It challenges the idea that this was just a
random act of violence.
yeah, spontaneous eruption of violence. It argues that this lynching probably fueled a lot of fear and mistrust within the Black community.
Yeah, bet.
It really sets the stage for how quickly things could escalate.
Okay, so let's talk about the incident that sparked the massacre.
Yeah.
Then Dick Rowland and Sarah Page in that elevator.
Right.
What do we actually know about what happened?
Well, that's where things get a little murky.
Yeah.
We know Roland, a young Black shoe shiner,
Okay.
was in the Drexel building elevator, operated by Page, a young white woman,
Okay.
and a clerk thought he saw an assault, and Roland was arrested.
But the report also says that Page never pressed charges.
Yeah, exactly.
And the police chief at the time even noted that she didn't have any visible injuries.
Exactly. And that raises so many questions.
Right.
It makes you wonder about the role of assumptions and just how quickly a situation can just spiral out of control.
Yeah. And then there's that whole mystery surrounding the missing Tulsa Tribune editorial.
Oh, right.
Survivors talk about an inflammatory piece that might have even encouraged a lynching, but no one can find a copy.
No one can find a copy.
It's like a historical puzzle.
It really is, yeah. It
Right.
just highlights the power of the media.
Yeah.
Even back then, just
Yeah.
the thought of that story, even though we can't confirm the content, really it adds another layer to the tension
Yeah, for sure.
building in Tulsa.
So we've got racial tension, an incident shrouded in uncertainty, and the media possibly fanning the flames.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, rumors of a potential lynching
Okay.
started to spread
And a white mob gathered at the courthouse.
where Roland was being held.
Exactly.
Okay. And then Sheriff McCullough comes in.
Right.
He refuses to hand Roland over to the mob.
Yes, he defied them.
He defied them
And barricaded himself inside the courthouse,
with his deputies.
protecting Roland.
Yeah.
That took some serious guts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then a group of armed Black men show up at the courthouse, too,
Right.
seemingly to protect Roland.
Uh-huh.
And this is where things get really complicated.
Yeah, because it's often portrayed as an overreaction.
Yeah.
But the report really challenges that, given the history of lynchings and the very real possibility that law enforcement wouldn't protect a Black man.
Right.
Their actions make a lot of sense.
It really puts you in their shoes, doesn't it? Imagining the fear and the uncertainty they must have felt.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, of course, a shot rings out,
Yes.
and the situation explodes.
Everything changes.
And the report couldn't say for sure who fired first.
Sadly, no.
There are conflicting accounts.
Right.
And after all these years, that truth might be lost to history.
Lost to history.
But what is clear is that once that shot was fired, everything changed.
So walk us through that night.
Okay.
What happened in those crucial hours?
Well, the standoff just completely devolved into a full-blown massacre.
Okay.
The white mob, now armed and enraged, began attacking Greenwood.
And it wasn't just random violence, was it?
No, not at all.
The report describes a level of organization to the destruction that's terrifying.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It wasn't just chaos, it was methodical.
Mhm.
The report actually describes white men moving systematically house to house, burning and looting everything in their path.
That level of coordination is just chilling.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes the violence even more horrifying.
And to make matters worse, instead of protecting Greenwood's residents,
Right.
the police deputized members of the mob and even helped them organize.
Wow.
It adds another layer of betrayal to the whole tragedy.
So you have this angry mob, given power by law enforcement, systematically destroying a community.
Yeah, and the report details accounts of Black residents being disarmed by police,
Yeah.
only for those same officers to give the weapons to the mob.
It's hard to fathom.
Yeah.
And as the burning and looting continued, Black residents, they fled for their lives.
Yeah, they had to.
The report states that thousands were rounded up and forced into internment camps by the very people who were supposed to protect them.
Exactly.
It's just a truly heartbreaking chapter in American history.
It really is.
It makes you wonder how the city even began to cope with such devastation after the smoke cleared.
Well, that's where things get even more complicated.
Sarah.
You know, you would expect a collective effort to heal and rebuild.
Right.
But what happened was a pattern of broken promises, further injustices, and even attempts to erase Greenwood altogether.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
The report mentions that local leaders initially rejected any outside help.
They did.
Yes, claiming they could handle the recovery on their own.
Oh, wow.
But then, instead of supporting Greenwood residents, they imposed these incredibly harsh new fire codes
Really?
that made it nearly impossible for people to rebuild.
So they refused help and then made it impossible for people to help themselves.
Very much.
It's almost like they were trying to capitalize on the tragedy.
And that's a point the report doesn't shy away from.
Yeah.
It details how many prominent figures in Tulsa ended up profiting from the destruction,
Really?
acquiring valuable land at a fraction of its worth.
Oh, wow.
And to add insult to injury, insurance companies refused to pay claims,
Oh, no.
citing something called riot clauses.
Riot clauses. What are those?
Right. Well, they were essentially loopholes
Okay.
that insurance companies used to deny claims during civil unrest.
So even if you had insurance,
Yeah.
you were unlikely to get any help if your property was damaged in a riot.
Exactly. And these clauses disproportionately impacted minority communities.
That's outrageous. So people lost their homes, their businesses, everything they had built. And there was no safety net, no way to recover.
It's true.
It's just layer upon layer of injustice.
It sadly is. It's a pattern we see repeated throughout history,
Yeah.
where systemic racism creates barriers to justice and recovery.
It's a reminder that even when the immediate violence ends, the damage can linger for generations.
Absolutely.
This deep dive is really getting heavy.
Yeah.
But there's one thing I'm still confused about.
Okay.
Didn't the report mention something about a federal investigation back in 1921?
Yes. That's a detail that really surprised me. There was a federal agent who went to Tulsa and actually investigated the massacre.
He did.
Yeah, and the report even includes excerpts from his findings, which are fascinating.
Really?
He interviewed witnesses, he gathered evidence,
Oh.
but ultimately no action was taken.
It's frustrating knowing that even with awareness at a federal level, nothing was done.
Yeah, I know.
What was the point of the investigation if there were no consequences?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It shows how far we've come in terms of recognizing and addressing hate crimes, but also how much further we still have to go.
This deep dive has been intense.
Yeah.
And we're only just scratching the surface.
We are.
We haven't even gotten to the legal analysis in the report yet.
Right, right.
That's where the report goes from historical analysis to a thought-provoking exploration of law and justice.
Exactly.
It asks, could the Tulsa Race Massacre happen today?
Yeah.
And if so, would justice even be possible?
It's a big question.
That's what I'm most curious about.
Okay, yeah.
Let's dive into those questions right after this.
Absolutely. We'll unpack the legal complexities and explore what the Tulsa Race Massacre teaches us about seeking justice for historical wrongs.
Sounds good.
It's fascinating. You know, the report doesn't shy away from the tough questions.
Yeah.
Like, it compares the legal landscape of 1921 to our laws today and asks, what if this happened now?
Okay, so if the Tulsa Race Massacre happened in 2025, what would be different legally?
A lot, actually.
I am.
Today, federal prosecutors have a lot more power to address hate crimes.
Okay.
There's the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act,
Okay.
which specifically targets crimes based on race.
Gotcha.
And then you've got the Fair Housing Act, which could be used in cases of property destruction
Okay.
motivated by race.
So those laws could have made a difference back then.
Potentially, yeah.
Does that mean the perpetrators could have been held accountable?
That's where the limitations of time come in.
Okay.
The report really emphasizes the statute of limitations.
Right.
Even if we could apply today's laws retroactively, most of the people involved are long gone.
Right, the statute of limitations.
Yeah.
Can you explain that for our listeners?
Sure, it's basically a time limit
Okay,
for how long after a crime someone can be charged.
gotcha.
It varies depending on the crime, but for many offenses, it's just a few years.
Okay.
So imagine trying to gather evidence and build a case after 100 years.
That would be next to impossible.
Exactly.
And then there's the issue of witnesses.
Right.
So many of those who experienced the massacre firsthand are no longer with us.
Exactly. Reliable eyewitness testimony
Yeah,
is crucial in any trial.
I agree.
As time passes, memories fade, people move, and sadly, many pass away.
Yeah.
And in this case, many survivors have already died, taking their firsthand accounts with them.
So even with stronger laws, proving the case after so much time would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
It's almost like justice is out of reach because of the passage of time, even if the evidence is there.
That's the harsh reality the report highlights.
Yeah.
Even with these undeniable historical wrongs,
Yeah.
legal accountability isn't always possible.
Well,
It really makes you think about the limitations of the legal system, doesn't it?
it definitely does.
Yeah.
It's like a whole other layer of tragedy on top of the event itself.
Right.
But the report goes deeper, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
It examines allegations of misconduct against specific individuals and groups.
You're right.
Mm.
They look at the actions of the Tulsa Police Department,
Great.
the sheriff, the National Guard, even private citizens and organizations like the Ku Klux Klan.
Oh.
They analyze each entity's role under both 1921 laws and those we have today.
Given what we've discussed, I imagine that section of the report is pretty damning.
It is,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the police.
Right.
There's evidence that some officers actively participated in the violence.
Yeah.
They deputized members of the mob,
Wow.
and some even engaged in the arson and looting themselves.
That's just sickening.
It is.
Those who are supposed to protect and serve
Yeah.
actively participating in such a horrific event.
It's a dark side of history that we have to acknowledge.
Yeah.
The report shows how power can be abused and how prejudice can poison even the institutions meant to uphold justice.
Makes you wonder about the lasting impact of those actions
Absolutely.
on the community's trust in law enforcement.
Yeah, for sure.
What about the sheriff?
Yeah.
He seemed to initially try to protect Roland.
Right.
Did the report shed more light on his actions?
Well, Sheriff McCullis is an interesting figure.
Okay.
He refused to hand Roland over to the mob,
Right.
but there are questions about his actions later on.
Really?
The report mentions conflicting accounts about whether he actually summoned armed black men to the courthouse,
He did.
potentially escalating the situation.
Oh, wow.
It also points out that he didn't do much to stop the violence once it started.
So it sounds like he was caught in a difficult position,
Yeah,
trying to uphold the law while facing immense pressure from both sides.
absolutely.
Must have been a chaotic and terrifying situation for everyone
I
involved.
must have been, yeah.
And then there's the National Guard.
Right.
They're supposed to be the ones who come in and restore order during emergencies.
I think so.
Did they play a role in the massacre?
Well, their arrival was delayed, and even when they did arrive,
Yeah.
their actions were questionable.
Really?
They didn't get to Tulsa until the morning after the worst of the violence.
Oh.
And even then, instead of protecting black residents,
Yeah.
they participated in rounding them up,
Oh, no.
forcing them into those internment camps.
Wow. So the very people meant to provide safety ended up being part of the problem.
Sadly, yes.
It adds another layer of tragedy to an already devastating situation.
It really does.
The report paints a very disturbing picture of how systemic racism and bias infected every level of authority.
It does.
It raises important questions about how we ensure accountability
Yeah,
and prevent such abuses of power from happening again.
it does.
This deep dive is really challenging some of the assumptions I had about this event.
It is challenging.
What about those conspiracy theories mentioned in the report?
Right.
The ones about the massacre being pre-planned by city leaders or powerful business interests.
Yeah, those are some of the most intriguing parts of the report.
Okay.
It explores the fact that many prominent figures in Tulsa
Yeah.
benefited from Greenwood's destruction,
Right.
acquiring valuable land at a fraction of its worth.
Uh-huh.
Some believe they may have deliberately instigated the massacre
Wow.
for their own gain.
That's a chilling thought.
It is.
Did the report find any evidence to support those theories?
It acknowledges those theories,
Okay.
but it doesn't definitively prove or disprove them.
Okay.
The report points out that the way things unfolded
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily suggest a well-organized plot,
Okay.
but it also doesn't rule out the possibility that individuals with influence may have taken advantage of the chaos
Right.
for their own benefit.
So a lot of unanswered questions there.
Yeah.
What about the rumors of airplanes being used to drop something on Greenwood?
The report addresses those rumors, too.
Okay.
There are numerous eyewitness accounts.
Describing airplanes flying over Greenwood
Yeah.
and dropping something that caused fires to spread rapidly.
Wow.
Some believe they were bombs or incendiary devices.
Did the report confirm whether those accounts were accurate?
It doesn't confirm or deny them.
Okay.
You know, it's possible that witnesses in the chaos and fear
Yeah.
misinterpreted what they saw.
Okay.
But it's also possible that airplanes were indeed used as weapons against the Black community.
Really?
The report highlights this as another area where further investigation is needed.
It's a chilling thought.
It is.
The idea of airplanes being used in such a way, it
Yeah.
speaks to the level of brutality and hatred that fueled the massacre.
Absolutely.
It's one of those details that just adds to the horror of the event
Right.
and raises even more questions about the extent of the violence.
It does.
This deep dive is one of those that leaves you with more questions than answers.
It does.
It feels like we're only just scratching the surface. And I think that's intentional on the part of the report's authors.
Right.
I think they want to spark curiosity,
Okay.
to encourage further exploration, to remind us that history is rarely black and white.
So with all these legal roadblocks and unanswered questions, what's the takeaway for our listener?
Yeah.
What does this report ultimately tell us about the Tulsa Race Massacre and its legacy?
I think the report's most important contribution is its unflinching look at a dark chapter in American history. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our past.
Right.
And consider how those events continue to shape our present.
It's about more than just the Tulsa Race Massacre, isn't it?
It is.
It's about recognizing how historical injustices, even those that can't be prosecuted,
Right.
demand acknowledgement and understanding.
Exactly.
And this deep dive is really just the beginning.
Yeah.
We encourage you to read the full report,
Yes.
explore other resources,
Right.
and continue learning about this important history.
It's
There's so much more to uncover.
There is.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
This conversation has been incredibly insightful,
It has.
but I feel like we need a moment to gather our thoughts
Yeah.
before moving on to any final reflections.
Okay.
What do you think?
I agree. Let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've discussed so far.
Okay.
Before we wrap up our deep dive into the Tulsa Race Massacre.
This deep dive has been, well, it's been heavy.
Yeah.
It's one of those topics that just sticks with you.
It does.
What stands out to you most from the report?
I think what strikes me most is that the report doesn't just detail this horrific event.
Yeah.
It raises questions about how we remember and reckon with these historical injustices.
Right.
It challenges us to ask, like, what are the ongoing impacts of the Tulsa Race Massacre?
Right.
And how can we make sure
Yeah.
that such atrocities are never repeated?
It's a good point. It's easy to think of history as something in the past,
Right.
over and done with. But this report shows just how deeply those events can echo through generations.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Tulsa Race Massacre wasn't just about the immediate loss of life and property.
No.
It's about the destruction of a thriving community, a symbol of Black success built through hard work and determination.
Right.
And the trauma, the economic disenfranchisement, the loss of cultural heritage, those impacts are still felt today.
They are.
It makes you wonder what Greenwood could have become
Yeah.
if it hadn't been so brutally destroyed.
It's a question that lingers, isn't it?
Yeah.
The report doesn't try to answer that,
Right.
but it does underscore the need for continued research,
Okay.
uncovering those lost stories, really understanding the full scope of the massacre's legacy.
So if our listener wants to learn more, where would you suggest they go from here?
Well, the report itself is just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay.
It's packed with details we
Yeah.
couldn't even touch on in this deep dive.
No, right?
There are countless other resources available. Books, documentaries, even museums
Yeah.
dedicated to preserving this history.
You mentioned reparations earlier.
Yeah.
And I know that's a topic the report touches on as well.
It's a complex issue with many facets.
Yeah.
The report details how promises of compensation were made to the survivors,
Yeah.
but they were never fulfilled.
It's like another layer of injustice,
It is.
adding to the pain and frustration.
Absolutely.
Were there any efforts to right those wrongs?
Even all these years later,
Yeah.
the report discusses more recent legal attempts
That's
to
okay.
seek some kind of redress.
Yeah.
But so far, they haven't been successful.
Wow.
It highlights the challenges of achieving justice for events that happened so long ago.
So even though criminal prosecution isn't possible,
Right.
the fight for some measure of justice continues.
It does.
And those efforts often focus on acknowledging the truth,
Yes.
memorializing the victims, and ensuring that this history isn't forgotten. It's about honoring the memory of those who were lost and those who survived,
Yeah,
and making sure their stories are heard.
it is.
It's a powerful reminder that even though the legal system might not always provide the answers we seek,
Yeah.
the pursuit of truth and acknowledgement is crucial.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
This deep dive has been a journey through a very painful chapter in American history.
It has.
It's heavy, it's challenging, but it's essential to engage with these stories.
It's been a reminder
Yeah.
of the importance of truth, justice, and the enduring power of remembrance.
If this conversation has left you with questions,
Yeah.
keep digging.
Okay.
Explore those resources, engage with this history, because understanding the past is essential to building a more just and equitable future.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Tulsa Race Massacre.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back with another exploration of a topic that matters to you.
See you next time.
Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.